The BF-110 and its variants, the 210 and 410, has its origins with a desire by Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring in 1934 to develop a strategic fighter called the Kampfzerstörer, or battle destroyer. It would ultimately prove to be a formidable aircraft design. At the beginning, however, the Messerschmitt BF-110 had very mixed fortunes. It has often been criticized for its failure during the Battle of Britain, while its successes in other fields have been largely ignored. Yet this aircraft, that did not match up to Luftwaffe expectations, managed to serve Germany throughout the Second World War in long-range escort fighter, fighter bomber, reconnaissance, ground attack, and night fighter roles. The long-range multi-seat escort fighter is possibly the most difficult of combat aircraft to design. Such a machine as was required by Marshal Göring to equip the elite Zerstörer formations that he envisaged had to be capable of penetrating deep into enemy territory, possessing sufficient range to accompany bomber formations. The fuel tank capacity necessary presented a serious weight penalty and called for the use of two engines if the Zerstörer was to achieve a performance approaching that of the single-seat fighter interceptor it was certain to oppose. Still, the 110 had the potential of becoming an exceptional addition to the Luftwaffe's fleet, if its initial design problems could be overcome. Having a fighter of sheer bulk, however, was not necessarily enough for it to be able to easily defeat an enemy fighter. It also had to be blessed with extraordinary maneuverability if it was to successfully oppose a Spitfire or a Hurricane. Messerschmitt himself possessed no previous experience with twin-engine military aircraft when he commenced work on the BF-110. His first warplane, the superb single-seater BF-109, had been conceived the previous summer. At the time, the most powerful aero engine of national design available was the Junkers Jabo 210A of 610 horsepower. It was obvious from the outset that even a pair of these would be inadequate to provide the necessary power such a large and heavy machine would need. Messerschmitt designers had started working on an upgrade of the BF-110 in 1937, before the production version of the 110 had ever flown. In late 1938, the 110 was just entering service, and the RLM started looking ahead for its eventual replacement. Messerschmitt sent in the modified 110 design as the ME210. It was a straightforward cleanup of the 110 and used many of the same parts. The main differences were a single-tail configuration, a modified nose area that was much shorter and located over the center of gravity. It also had an all-new wing design for higher cruise speeds. On paper, the 210's performance was impressive. It could reach 385 miles per hour on two 601F engines, making it about 50 miles per hour faster than the BF-110, and nearly as fast as single-engine fighters of the era. The BF-110 carried its ordnance externally, on the wings and fuselage, but this created drag. The ME210 avoided this problem by housing the bombs in an enclosed bay in the nose of the aircraft. The ME210 could carry up to 2,200 pounds of bombs. The aircraft had dive brakes fitted on the tops of the wings and a Stuvi 5B bomb sight in the nose for shallow dive bombing. In the fighter role, the bomb bay was fitted with 4 20mm cannon. For defense, the ME210's rear gunner was armed with 2 MG-131 machine guns. These were fitted into the half-teardrop-shaped turrets mounted on each side of the airplane and were remote-controlled from the gunner's position. The rear cockpit canopy was bulged out to allow the gunner to aim down and to the rear. The guns were electrically fired, and electrical contact breakers prevented the gunner from shooting off the 21's tailplane. An order for 1,000 ME210s was placed even before the prototype had flown. In time, this would prove to be a mistake. The first prototype flew with DB601 engines in September 1939 and was considered unsafe by test pilots. Stability was bad in turns, and it tended to snake even while flying level. At first, the designers concentrated on the twin rudder arrangement that had been taken from the 110 and replaced it with the new and much larger single-tail vertical stabilizer. However, this had almost no effect, and the plane continued to oscillate. The ME210 also suffered from terrible stalls with the nose up or in a turn. The stalls whipped into spins when the automatic leading edge slates opened. An ME210 was lost in September 1940 when the pilot could not get out of the resulting spin and had to jump. The chief test pilot commented that the ME210 had all the least desirable attributes an airplane could possess. It took 16 prototypes and 94 pre-production examples to try and resolve the many problems. Nevertheless, the RLM was desperate to replace the BF-110s currently in service and ordered full production in the spring of 1941. Plans to introduce the ME210 had been underway since 1939, but the aircraft proved to be extremely unstable and was never considered useful enough to enter production. Nevertheless, the Hungarians made a number of minor modifications to the layout to produce the ME210C, which proved to be superior to the German versions. So superior, in fact, that there was some talk of introducing a new ME210D version for production in Germany, otherwise identical to the Hungarian 210Cs. As studies progressed on the 210D, it was instead decided to introduce a new model, the ME410. The major change between the 210 and the 410 was the introduction of the larger and more powerful Daimler-Benz 603A engines, which improved power from the earlier DB605s. The engine performance increased the 410's maximum speed to 388 miles per hour, greatly improved climb rates, service ceiling, and, most notably, the cruise speed, which jumped to 360 miles per hour. It also improved payload capacity to the point where the aircraft could lift more ordnance than it could fit into the bomb bay under the nose. To address this, shackles were added under the wings for 4 110-pound bombs. These changes added a total of 15,000 pounds to the ME210 design, but the extra engine power more than made up for this difference. The 410 was the plane that the 210 should have been. Deliveries began in mid-1943, more than 2 years later than the original plan had called for. When it arrived, it was liked by its crews, even though its improved performance was not enough to protect it from swarms of high-performance Allied aircraft. Its arrival came at a crucial time for the Luftwaffe. Allied bombing raids were getting more intense. The RAF heavy bomber fleet was now laying waste with large attacks on the Third Reich's cities. It was beginning to be a very grim time for Germans on the home front. The 410 was only moderately successful as a bomber-destroyer attacking unescorted enemy aircraft. A considerable number of kills against American day bomber formations were amassed. Unfortunately for the Luftwaffe, the ME-410 was no match in a dogfight with lighter single-engine fighters, such as the P-51 Mustang or the P-47 Thunderbolt. In early 1944, ME-410 units were frequently mauled by the swarms of Allied fighters protecting the bomber streams. For example, on the 13th of May 1944, one unit was jumped by 20 P-51s and 12 ME-410s were lost. From the summer of 1944, the destroyers were taken from frontline duties and production was phased out in favor of single-engine fighters, with the 410s remaining in service on reconnaissance duties only. The basic A-series planes were armed with two 7.92mm MG-17 and two 20mm MG-151-20 guns in the nose, and delivered as the ME-410A, a light bomber. The originally planned heavy fighter ME-410A-2 was canceled because the dual Mk-103 cannon pack was not ready in time. The ME-410A featured a bomb bay for carrying air-to-ground ordnance or for the installation of additional air-to-air weapons or other equipment. Initially, 3 conversion kits were available. The U-1 contained a pallet of cameras for the photo reconnaissance role. U-2 had two 20mm MG-151-20 guns with 250 rounds each for heavy fighter use, and U-4 used the 50mm BK-5 cannon with 21 rounds to turn the aircraft into a dedicated bomber-destroyer. The BK-5 cannon, derived from a now outdated anti-tank weapon, allowed the 410s to shoot at their targets from over 1,000 yards, a distance at which the bomber's guns were useless for defense. The low rate of fire and limited ammunition supply, together with the extra weight of the large gun, made the other anti-bomber versions of the 410 much more useful. The dedicated reconnaissance version ME-410A3 received a deeper fuselage for additional cameras and fuel. The 410A3 entered service in small numbers in early 1944 and equipped 3 long-range recon units, one on the Western Front and the other 2 on the Eastern Front. The ME-410B series was largely the same as the A series, but replaced the 7.92mm MG-17 guns with 13mm MG-131 guns. The originally planned 1,900 horsepower DB603G engine was canceled in early 1944, so all 410s used DB603A or DB603AA engines, just like the A series. The DB603G would have increased the maximum speed to 392 miles per hour and cruising speed to 370 miles per hour, although the weights increased once again. The versions were the same as the A versions, the 410, B1, B2, and B3 models filling the same roles as the earlier A1, A2, and A3 versions. Several experimental models were also developed. The ME-410B5 added shackles under the fuselage to carry a torpedo and removed the MG-131s in the nose to make room for the FUG ship search radar. The bomb bay was not used in this version in order to make room for a 650-liter fuel tank, and the defensive gun barbettes were replaced by another 700-liter fuel tank for long-range missions. The 410B6 was a similar anti-shipping conversion, but intended for the short-range coastal role only. For this mission, it did not use a torpedo and was instead a simple modification of the B1 with the FUG-200 radar. The ME-410B7 and B8s were updated B3 reconnaissance models that were only built as prototypes. The ME-410C was a high-altitude version drawn up in early 1944, with 2 new wing designs that increased the span to 67 feet. The larger wings allowed the gear to retract directly into the rear. A new universal engine mount would allow for the use of any of the DB603JZ or BMW 801J turbocharged engines, or the UMO 213E 2-stage mechanically supercharged engines, driving a new 4-bladed propeller with very wide blades. The 801 was air-cooled, and the 213 used an annular radiator in the nose, so the normal underwing radiators were removed, and the DB-powered versions would use the radiator from the 213s. None were ever built, as the ME-410 production was canceled before the engines matured. The ME-410D was a simpler upgrade to the B series to improve altitude performance, but not to the same degree as the C series. It would be powered by the DB603JZ engines, and had a revised forward fuselage to increase the field of view of the pilot and reduce drag. It also replaced portions of the outer wing panels with ones made of wood to conserve strategic materials. Several were built, but like many other attempts at wood construction, the loss of the Tego film factory in a bombing raid meant the adhesives available were not strong enough, and the wooden portions failed. Production was eventually canceled to concentrate on Messerschmitt BF 109Gs in August 1944 after 1,160 ME410s were built. In spite of its difficulties, the ME110 and its derivatives did contribute to the German war effort. On the 11th of January 1944, 650 heavy bombers were sent deep into Germany to attack the aircraft factories in the Braunschweig area. The massed fighters of the Zerstörer Gruppen poured their rockets into the tightly packed groups, breaking up the bombers' protective formations, and then joined the BF-109s in attacking individual aircraft. 41 bombers were lost that day. On the 16th of March, 43 planes of the ZG-76 caught the heavies without fighter escort and knocked down 18 B-17s. After their third pass, however, the bomber escort arrived and dived to the attack. During the ensuing battle, 60% of the Zerstörer were shot down. From time to time, the night fighters were also used on day operations. They were first employed as the close escort to the Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau off the Dutch coast. And in the summer of 1943, they fought American day bomber formations whenever the latter flew unescorted. The German fighter groups sustained heavy losses during these actions owing to their pilots, trained in night fighting tactics, going in too close before attacking, and suffering withering fire from the bombers. The BF-110 in particular was also no match even for the heavy P-47 Thunderbolts, which were often used in an escort role. Shortly after these events, while the 410s continued to fly, the Zerstörer Gruppen traded their 110s for BF-109Gs. Thus ended the checkered career of one of the most enigmatic fighters of World War II.